She warned him over and over. Then the dog snapped, and a 15-year-old did what the adults wouldn't. The dog was growling. And nobody was doing anything about it. Not the parents. Not the aunts and uncles. Nobody. They were just standing there watching this 4-year-old terrorize a German shepherd, and the only thing coming out of their mouths was directed at the dog. Grown adults with fully developed brains and decades of life experience between them, people who had presumably been around animals before, people who were guests in someone else's home, and not one of them looked at that situation and thought that maybe, just maybe, they should step in. They watched. They observed. And somehow, in the theater of their collective inaction, the dog was the one getting the lecture. Let me set the scene properly because this whole situation deserves context before we get to the part that apparently made an entire family lose their minds. Our narrator here is 15 years old. 15. They are hosting a birthday party for their dad, trying to help set food out, trying to be a good host, and also trying to keep their dog safe in a house full of people who clearly had very different ideas about how animals should be treated. Picture that for a second. A teenager, already juggling the social anxiety of being around a house full of relatives, already trying to do right by their parent, carrying this additional weight of watching a situation spiral while every adult around them seemed completely unbothered. That is not a position any 15-year-old should be in. And yet there they were. The dog, a big beautiful German shepherd, had already been patient enough to deserve a medal. She had been grabbed at, chased, pulled on, and poked throughout this entire gathering, and every single time she showed any sign of discomfort, the adults in the room apparently saw it as a light suggestion rather than a warning. Think about what that patience actually looks like on a dog her size. The pinned ears. The tucked tail. The way she would try to move her body away from small hands that kept reaching for her, only to find herself cornered by furniture or walls with nowhere left to go. The stiff posture that says clearly and without any ambiguity that she was done, she was uncomfortable, she was asking for this to stop. Dogs give you signals. They always do. The body language, the stiffness, the way they move away from whatever is bothering them, that is communication. And if you ignore it long enough, you get to the growl. And if you ignore the growl, you get to the snap. And if you ignore the snap, you get to the lunge. And at that point someone is going to get hurt. Our narrator had already tried to handle this the right way. They pulled the kid aside, got down to his level the way you are supposed to with young children, spoke to him in a calm and measured way, explained that the dog did not want to play, explained that she was not happy, and told him clearly to leave her alone. You can imagine how that felt for a 15-year-old who probably had no idea what the right words even were, just knowing instinctively that something bad was building in that room and they were the only one moving to stop it. And look, this kid is 4 years old. 4-year-olds do not always understand the concept of boundaries, especially when there is a big fluffy dog right there that they just want to hug. That is completely developmentally normal. The child is not the villain of this story. What is villainous is the complete absence of any adult stepping in to back up what this 15-year-old was saying and actually supervise their own child. After being told to stop, the kid huffed and wandered off, and for a moment it seemed like the situation had resolved itself. Our narrator probably let out a quiet breath, maybe went back to whatever task they had been doing, hoping that was the end of it. The house was still full of noise, relatives talking over each other, plates clinking, someone laughing too loud in the next room. The kind of background chaos that makes it easy to lose track of one small child moving quietly through a busy space. And maybe that is exactly what happened to every adult in that house. Maybe they told themselves it was fine now. Maybe they stopped paying attention the moment the crisis felt like it had passed. But a 4-year-old with unspent energy and a dog who had already been pushed too far is not a situation that resolves itself by hoping. It waits. It finds a quieter corner of the house. And then it continues. But then the dog disappeared. And anyone who knows dogs, really knows dogs, understands what that means. When a social dog who loves being around people suddenly removes herself from the room, she is telling you something. She is saying the environment has become too much and she needs space. That is not aggression. That is a dog doing exactly what she should do, taking herself away from the source of her stress rather than escalating. The problem is she still got followed. Our narrator went looking for her the moment she realized the dog had gone somewhere. Not because she was in trouble, but because our narrator knew. They knew that kid was still somewhere in that house, unsupervised, with energy to burn and absolutely zero concept of why the dog needed to be left alone. There was probably a cold, sinking feeling in their chest as they moved through that house, the kind of dread that comes when you already know what you are going to find but you are hoping with everything you have that you are wrong. And so they went through that crowded house, weaving past relatives who were laughing and talking and completely absorbed in their own conversations, past platters of food, past all of the birthday chaos, following the sound of something that should have made every adult in that kitchen move immediately. The growling. That sound stopped this narrator in their tracks and then sent them sprinting in the right direction. There is something about a dog growling in earnest that bypasses rational thought entirely. It is a sound that lives in the oldest part of the brain, the part that understands danger before the rest of you has caught up. And our narrator felt it, felt the bottom drop out of their stomach, felt their legs moving before they had made a conscious decision to run. And what they found when they got to the kitchen was exactly as bad as they feared. The dog was backed into a corner, her body language screaming, every muscle coiled and tense, and the kid was still right there in front of her, still reaching, still completely unaware of how close this entire situation was to becoming something none of them could take back. The dog had already snapped. She had already barked. She had already lunged slightly. And the adults standing there were scolding the dog. The dog. The animal who had been patient for hours, who had communicated discomfort repeatedly, who had finally reached her absolute limit and was doing the only thing she had left to do. They were telling her off like she was the problem. This is where I need to stop and say something directly. A German shepherd defending herself from a child grabbing and provoking her is not a vicious dog. She is a dog who was failed by every adult in that house except one. So our narrator did what none of the grown adults around them were willing to do. They stepped in. Their whole body was probably shaking, their heart hammering somewhere in their throat, the kind of adrenaline that makes your hands move before your brain has processed what they are doing. They gave the kid a light tap on the head, the kind that is more of a wake-up call than anything else, the kind that communicates firmly that something serious just happened and you need to stop right now. Was it the perfect response? No. Our narrator admits that, and they were 15, panicking, terrified someone was about to get seriously hurt, acting on adrenaline and fear while surrounded by adults who had completely abdicated their responsibility. And then they grabbed the dog and got her out of there, putting their body between that animal and the rest of the room, finally giving her the safety and distance she had been begging for this entire time. Now here is where the story takes a turn, because everything that happened after is honestly just as wild as the kitchen scene itself. The aunt, the mother of the 4-year-old who had been allowed to terrorize a dog for the entire gathering, marched up to this 15-year-old and said, word for word, "Don't you hit my son, you wee shit." To a teenager. In that teenager's own home. On their father's birthday. A woman who had been physically present in that house all afternoon, who had watched her son chase and grab and poke a large dog, who had done nothing, not one single thing, to intervene, went ahead and pointed the full force of her fury at the child who actually intervened. The sheer whiplash of that moment must have been staggering. To go from the terror of that kitchen scene, heart still pounding, hands still shaking, dog still stressed beside you, to being screamed at by the very person who should have prevented it in the first place. And notice what she did not say. She did not say, "Is everyone okay?" She did not say, "Thank goodness that dog did not bite him." She did not say, "I should have been watching him more closely." She went straight to the 15-year-old. Because that was easier. The absolute nerve. And then it gets even better. Multiple family members texted afterward. Not to check on the dog. Not to acknowledge what had nearly happened in that kitchen. Not to offer any kind of reflection on the fact that their collective inaction had put both a child and an animal in genuine danger. They texted to weigh in on the tap. One of them actually sent this 15-year-old a link to a therapist website and a lecture about the dangers of hitting children. You have to let that sink in for a moment. Someone opened their phone, searched for a therapist, copied the link, typed out a message, and sent it to a teenager who had just spent their father's birthday party doing the job every adult in that house should have been doing. Someone thought that was the correct use of their energy. Because a light tap on the head during a crisis moment is apparently the hill this family decided to die on. Not the fact that a toddler was allowed to push a German Shepherd past her breaking point. Not the fact that the adults in that kitchen did nothing. Not the fact that Deborah, and yes, I am using that fake name with full energy, could not be bothered to parent her own child for an entire afternoon. A therapist link. To a 15-year-old who just prevented a child from being bitten by a dog. Let that land for a second. Let me be crystal clear about where I stand on this whole situation, because I want there to be absolutely no ambiguity here. This teenager did not do anything wrong in any way that actually matters. Yes, tapping a child is not the ideal response to a stressful moment. Anyone with a calm mind and 30 seconds to think would probably choose differently. But calm minds and 30 seconds are not what you have when a large dog is lunging and every adult around you has chosen to narrate the situation rather than stop it. What this 15-year-old did came from a place of genuine fear and protective instinct. They were trying to stop someone from getting hurt. That is not abuse. That is not cruelty. That is a young person doing what every adult in that room failed to do. The real story here is not the tap. The real story is that an entire room full of grown adults watched a 4-year-old provoke a German Shepherd to the point of lunging, and their response was to scold the dog. The real story is that a 15-year-old had to absorb the fear, take the action, and then absorb the blame, all in the span of a single afternoon, while the people who created that situation faced zero consequences and redirected every ounce of their discomfort outward. The real story is that when this teenager took the only action available to them in that moment, the same adults who had done nothing suddenly found all kinds of energy for outrage. The real story is that a child, one who is not even old enough to drive, had to be the responsible one in a house full of people who absolutely should have known better. The family members sending links to therapy websites and declaring they will never speak to this narrator again are not protecting a child. They are protecting their own egos. Because if they actually examine what happened honestly, they have to confront the fact that they failed. They failed the dog. They failed to supervise their own child. They failed to back up the warnings that were given. And when it all came to a head, they were standing right there and they did nothing. That is an uncomfortable truth to live with. It is much easier to make a 15-year-old the villain of the story, to frame the tap as an outrage worth endless text messages and therapist links, than to sit quietly with the knowledge that you were present for the whole thing and you chose to do nothing at every single step. It is a lot easier to be outraged at a teenager than to sit with that. This is one of those stories where the verdict is not even close. Not even a little bit. This young person handled an impossible situation with more maturity and protective instinct than anyone in that house who was old enough to vote. And if Deborah wants to spend her time texting angry messages instead of teaching her son to respect animals, that says everything that needs to be said about why this whole situation happened in the first place. Leave the dog alone. And maybe, just maybe, start parenting your kid before the next dog they meet is a lot less patient. He cancels whenever he wants but demands a stylist who is always ready. My husband does not see the problem. He is 42 years old and he just said this is my lifestyle and how it has to be. About hair appointments. This is one of those situations where you hear the words coming out of someone's mouth and you have to genuinely wonder if they are listening to themselves. Because the logic on display here is so spectacularly tangled that it almost loops back around to being impressive. Let me walk you through what is actually being asked here, because I want to make sure we are all seeing the full picture before we get to the verdict. This husband goes to a salon once a month or so, spending around $100 each visit, which is already a meaningful expense on a budget that the family is consciously trying to manage. His wife is a stay-at-home mom who does her own hair herself to save money. She sits in front of a mirror at home, with whatever tools she has, and she makes it work, because that is the kind of sacrifice you make when a household is trying to be intentional with money. She has accepted the expense of his appointments. She has accepted that it matters to him, that it is tied up somehow in how he feels about himself or how he presents at work or whatever story he tells about why this particular line item is non-negotiable. She has not picked that fight. She looked at the number, weighed it against the piece it would cost her to argue about it, and she moved on. That is called being reasonable. That is called choosing your battles. And it matters that she did that, because it tells you exactly what kind of person she is going into this conflict. The problem is not the salon. The problem is the pattern that has been building around the salon. He books appointments, and then he cancels them the day of. Regularly. Not once in a while, not as a rare exception when something genuinely unavoidable comes up, but as a recurring feature of how he operates. Because things get busy at work, or whatever is going on, or whatever other reason he reaches for in the moment to make canceling feel justified. Now, anyone who has ever worked in a service industry, especially as a stylist or a barber, knows that a day of cancellation is not just an inconvenience. It is a slot that cannot be filled on short notice. It is an hour or more of that stylist's working day that is now just empty. It is income that is simply gone. She already turned away other clients to hold that time. She already mentally prepared for that appointment. And the only reason this went on for as long as it did without consequence is that his stylist was being kind. She was absorbing the cost of his unreliability out of her own pocket and choosing not to charge him the cancellation fee she was fully entitled to charge, because she is not a confrontational person and she valued the ongoing relationship and probably hoped things would improve on their own. He interpreted that kindness as permission. And that is where the real problem lies, buried inside this story about haircuts and scheduling. When someone is repeatedly accommodating you, when someone keeps bending their own rules for you and absorbing the cost of your behavior without complaint, the correct response is gratitude and genuine effort to do better. You do not look at that pattern and quietly conclude that the accommodations are permanent and unconditional. You do not take someone's patience, someone's actual financial sacrifice, and reclassify it in your head as simply how things work. You do not decide that because no one has yelled at you yet, no one minds. That is not a misunderstanding born of inattention. That is a choice. A slow, repeated, comfortable choice. And it is a choice that says something significant about how this man views the people who serve him and the value he assigns to their time versus his own. Then comes the moment the stylist finally, after however many months of quietly covering for him and smiling through it, says enough and announces she will be enforcing the cancellation fee going forward. She probably rehearsed how to say it. She probably felt a little anxious bringing it up, because people like her usually do. And his response is not embarrassment. It is not even a flicker of acknowledgement that he had been taking advantage of her generosity this whole time. His response is to start looking for a new stylist. A fresh person. Someone who does not yet know his pattern, someone whose goodwill has not been used up yet, someone he can begin this entire cycle with from the beginning. I cannot move past that without sitting here for a second. So his wife, quite reasonably, points out that a walk-in salon might actually be the perfect solution for someone with his scheduling habits. No appointments means no cancellations, no fees, no slowly deteriorating relationship with a stylist whose patience he is steadily exhausting. Just show up when work is slow and get the haircut. Simple. Flexible. Designed exactly for someone whose schedule apparently cannot be predicted or committed to. And this is when the conversation goes completely off the rails, because his response is that he cannot go to a walk-in salon because he needs a professional stylist with a barber license so they can trim his eyebrows and shape his beard properly. And also, he needs an appointment time set in advance so that the stylist is ready and waiting for him when he arrives and he does not have to sit around. He needs an appointment so he does not have to wait. Let that settle. He wants an appointment reserved in advance so the stylist is prepared and present at a specific time, because his time is valuable enough that waiting feels unreasonable to him. And he also wants the ability to cancel that appointment on the day of, without notice that allows anyone to fill the slot, and without paying the fee that exists precisely because of the damage that kind of cancellation causes. And he wants a stylist who will accept this arrangement without complaint, ideally indefinitely. And he wants all of this for $100 a month while his family is on a budget and his wife is carefully trimming her own hair at home to help make that budget work. This man has looked his wife directly in the face, after she laid out the exact contradiction in his expectations with surgical precision, after she literally asked him, "You see the hypocrisy in this, right?" And his answer was, "This is my lifestyle and how it has to be." What does that even mean? What lifestyle? The lifestyle of someone who wants the structure and convenience of an appointment without any of the responsibility that comes with holding one. That is not a lifestyle. That is just expecting other people to absorb the consequences of your choices quietly and indefinitely. And the stylist did absorb them, for months, until she simply could not anymore. And now his wife is being asked to absorb the next round by nodding along and accepting that this is simply how things are going to continue being. I want to be fair here and acknowledge that there is a version of this story where the husband genuinely does not see what he is doing. Some people move through the world in certain spaces so smoothly, have had things accommodated so consistently for so long, that they develop enormous blind spots around the imposition they represent to others. They are not calculating. They are not sitting down and thinking about how to extract the most from people around them. They just never developed the reflex to ask whether their comfort is costing someone else something real. And I think some of that is probably present here. But here is the thing. His wife did not leave that blind spot in the dark. She walked right up to it and shone a light directly on it. She explained the contradiction clearly, calmly, and specifically. She drew the precise line between what he was demanding and what those demands actually cost the people expected to fulfill them. And his response was not to pause. It was not to sit with it even briefly. It was to restate his position and attach the word lifestyle to it, as though that ends the conversation. That is the moment this goes from oblivious to something more deliberate. The verdict here is not complicated, and I will say it plainly. He is the one in the wrong. Full stop. The stylist was not wrong for finally enforcing a policy she always had every right to enforce. His wife is not wrong for pointing out the contradiction with honesty and clarity. He is the one who spent months benefiting from someone else's quiet generosity and then acted as though her decision to stop was the unreasonable part. He is the one who responded to a fair and careful explanation of why his expectations cause real harm by dismissing it as irrelevant to his lifestyle. And he is the one who, in a household actively trying to be careful and intentional with money, treats a $100 monthly appointment as though it comes with concierge-level flexibility included at no extra cost to anyone. There is something worth saying about what this reveals beyond just the haircut situation. When someone responds to a fair and logical point by saying this is how it has to be, they are not engaging with the argument. They are ending it. They are communicating that their comfort sits at the ceiling and your concerns sit at the floor, and that the space between those two things is simply not available for discussion. That is not a healthy dynamic in a marriage. That is not what partnership looks like. That is one person deciding that their preferences are facts, permanent and self-evident, and then waiting patiently for everyone around them to finish adjusting. His wife handled this with remarkable patience and clarity. She accepted the expense she disagreed with. She extended the benefit of the doubt when she was told the stylist did not mind the cancellations. She only pushed back when reality confirmed that her original instinct had been right the entire time. And when she explained her reasoning, she explained it well enough that there was no genuine room left for confusion. The answer she got back was not good enough. Not even close. He owes his former stylist an honest acknowledgement of what she actually absorbed on his behalf for all those months. And he owes his wife a real conversation, one that does not end with a declaration and a closed door. Because a lifestyle built on other people silently accommodating you is not a lifestyle. It is just entitlement with good hair. Drop a comment telling me which story made your jaw drop harder. If this video gave you something to think about, a like and a subscribe means the world and keeps these stories coming.